Ashes. That's all that remained of 14 of the richest men in Carolina. Their bones fused together inside a coal furnace that burned hotter than hell, and at the edge of the fire, calm as night itself, sat a woman sharpening knives. Her name was Esperanza de Lima. History buried her. I'm here to unearth her. 3 seconds. Right justice burns. Twice in the comments if you feel the fire inside you. That single act locks your place in this story forever. Now listen, in June of 1716, the Rice Council gathered inside the Greyfield estate. These men weren't farmers, they were kings without crowns. They dictated rice prices, decided who lived, who starved, who bled. They didn't just own land, they owned people. Flesh was currency, pain was policy. They believed themselves untouchable. That night proved them wrong. Esperanza had been silent for 15 years, her face unreadable, her tongue restrained. She poured their wine, bowed her head, cleared their plates. To them she was invisible. Another piece of furniture, another shadow in the corner. But in her silence she was watching, calculating, sharpening something far deadlier than steel. You see, Esperanza wasn't just another name on a ledger. She wasn't just another body ripped from the coast of Angola. She was the daughter of a chief, raised on strategy, trained in negotiation, steeped in rituals of power her captors dismissed as superstition. They saw a slave. What they bought was a tactician. And in her mind, every laugh at her expense, every lash on her people's backs, every scream buried beneath Carolina's soil was fuel, coal for a furnace only she knew how to stoke. But why have you never heard her story? Why was it sealed in Charleston's archives for 2 centuries? Because empires do not record their defeats. Because the system of chains cannot allow its captives to see that resistance can burn hotter than oppression. Before we descend deeper, hit subscribe. Stories like this were meant to stay buried, and yet here you are. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because you need to understand these dark histories are not confined to plantations. They live under your own soil. The Greyfield furnace is still glowing. Esperanza's words still echo. Justice burns slower than coal, but it burns complete. Before the fire, before the furnace, before her silence at Greyfield, there was Angola, a kingdom of red earth, river markets, drums in the night, and a young woman born into bloodline and command. Esperanza de Lima was not born a servant. She was born a daughter of power. Her father was a chief. Her mother a healer, feared for her knowledge of herbs, poisons, and whispers that bent men's minds. Esperanza was trained not in obedience, but in strategy. Taught to count resources like a general, to read a man's face like scripture, to use silence as a weapon sharper than iron. But kingdoms draw vultures, and in 1701, the Portuguese descended. Their ships carried more than sails. They carried fire, chains, and commerce baptized in blood. Esperanza watched her village burn, the crackle of flames mixing with the screams of her kin. She watched her father cut down. She watched her mother dragged into darkness. The air smelled of smoke and iron, the same stench that would one day rise from Greyfield's furnace. That was the night she lost everything, and the night something inside her did not break, but hardened. A seed planted, a vow unspoken. She was shackled, forced aboard the slave ship Santa Maria. The Atlantic crossing was a floating graveyard, bodies tossed into waves, souls torn from their homeland forever. But Esperanza survived, not through chance, not through mercy, but through will. Every lash, every insult, every humiliation, she stored them like coals. When she arrived in Charleston, she was renamed Esperanza. To her captors it meant hope. To her it became prophecy twisted in flame. Sold for 42 sterling to Edmund Greyfield, she was carried into the estate that would one day become her battlefield. Greyfield believed he had bought another silent shadow. He had bought his executioner. Because here's the secret: the Rice Council never understood dying. Power stolen is never permanent. They thought chains erased memory. They thought property could not plot. But Esperanza remembered every face from that Portuguese raid, every scream of her people, every humiliation of bondage. And she was waiting, watching, smiling when commanded, silent when ordered. But inside, she was sharpening time itself into a blade. History would later say the fire came suddenly, but truth, it began here, in Angola, in ashes. Greyfield Estate was not a home. It was a machine, a factory of cruelty where the gears were people, ground down until nothing remained but obedience or death. From the first day, Esperanza understood the rule's silence was survival. She bowed, she served, she feigned ignorance, answering in broken English though her ears drank in every word. To the Rice Council she was nothing, a servant with downcast eyes, a shadow that moved only when summoned. But in truth, she was recording everything, every conversation, every careless boast, every whispered scheme. She stored them like weapons in an invisible arsenal. She learned their habits, which planter preferred rum before speeches, which slipped into infidelity, which was weak when flattered. She memorized routes, escape passages, storage rooms, locks, keys, patrol times. 15 years of data, 15 years of watching tyrants grow careless in their arrogance. Greyfield, tall and pale-eyed, fancied himself her master. He had broken stronger men, turned proud women into husks. But Esperanza was different. She did not resist openly. She yielded, the perfect disguise. Her spirit was not broken, it was buried, biding its hour. The Rice Council treated their gatherings as triumphs. They laughed as they carved meat, drank, and exchanged methods of seasoning, Africans fresh off the ships. Esperanza was always in the room, pouring wine, clearing plates, her hands steady while her ears burned. They compared punishment methods like recipes. They treated starvation, branding, separation of families as if they were logistics in a business ledger. She never flinched. Not once. That was her greatest weapon, the mask of invisibility. While other slaves were beaten, broken, discarded, Esperanza endured untouched, precisely because she gave them no reason to notice her. They mistook her silence for emptiness. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is observation. Silence is preparation. And she was preparing. For 15 years, Esperanza refined her patience into a science. She practiced her English in whispers, learned the weaknesses of locks, observed the council's arrogance grow with each passing year. Every cruelty stoked her inner fire, but she never let it show. To them, she was nothing. A servant, a shadow, a ghost in their halls. But ghosts do not forget, and when they strike, it is without warning. In the suffocating rhythm of Greyfield Estate, Esperanza discovered something she thought she had lost forever, another soul who could see, even dimly, the fire behind her eyes. His name was Wayne. They called him Boy Tom in the ledger, but to Esperanza, he was a spark in the endless night of chains. 3 seconds. Type. Freedom whispers. Twice in the comments if you feel the pulse of rebellion stirring. Let the world know you recognize the fire of the oppressed. Wayne had survived what should have broken him. Sold to the Rutherford plantation, hardened by years of cruelty, he carried intelligence in his eyes. A quiet understanding that there were rules in this world, and yet there were cracks in them. He had learned to read and write in secret, teaching others in whispers while overseers turned their heads. To Esperanza, he was more than an ally. He was a mirror, someone who had endured, observed, and retained his mind while the plantation tried to strip it away. Their meetings began subtly. A nod across the field, a song hummed low enough for only them to understand. Gestures that looked ordinary to the overseers were codes, signals of escape, warnings, and plans. And then the conversations began, slow, deliberate, in Portuguese, the language of her youth. Every word was a seed of revolution. They shared intelligence about patrols, about the council's schedules, the weak links, the moments when the master's arrogance left them exposed. Esperanza's years of observation, Wayne's network of contacts across plantations. Together, they began to sketch a blueprint no one could see, a strike no one could anticipate. But it was more than strategy. It was personal. 15 years of oppression had become a force she could channel. But without Wayne, without trust, it might have remained only rage without direction. He brought her humanity back, but also sharpened her focus. They spoke of freedom not as a dream, but as a weapon. One precise, deliberate, and devastating. And then came the final revelation: the council had made a mistake. They had begun to believe themselves invincible. Arrogant, blind, self-assured. Esperanza and Wayne had studied their patterns for months. They knew every routine, every vulnerability, every indulgence. The plan, once theoretical, became inevitable. Because the longer you watch tyrants in their comfort, the more obvious their fall becomes. And Esperanza, daughter of kings, trained in strategy, survivor of flames and chains, was ready to strike. They believed themselves untouchable. And yet, the shadows around the Greyfield furnace were already moving. The kitchen of Greyfield Estate was a world unto itself. Iron kettles, polished counters, and the omnipresent heat of the coal furnace. It was a theater, and Esperanza was both audience and architect. Every morning she entered the room with the grace of invisibility. Every movement rehearsed, every glance calculated. She began by cataloging the instruments of death and control already present. Shackles and chains stored for punishment, tools that could restrain men as easily as they did slaves, were noted and memorized. The coal furnace itself, a monstrous construct imported from Britain, capable of reaching temperatures that would melt iron, became her focus. She learned its rhythms, the pulse of its fire, how to coax it to extremes without detection, how to stoke it so it could sustain hours of relentless heat. 3 seconds. Type, coal becomes justice. Twice in the comments to claim your place in this story, to recognize the power of patient vengeance. She watched the patterns of the council members with hawk-like precision. Marcus Sutton always arrived first. Benjamin Fairfax's weak bladder forced him into predictable breaks. Discussions about rice, slave management, and expansion followed the same sequence month after month. Knowledge of these routines was power, and Esperanza held it all. But it wasn't just about timing. It was about perception. She continued to perform her duties flawlessly, polishing silver, pouring wine, clearing plates, all while the machinery of her mind turned over every detail. Every step the council took toward the furnace, she anticipated. Every laugh, every boast, every casual cruelty became a data point. And the coal, the literal fuel of their downfall, she began to stockpile. Under the guise of preparing for expanded cooking operations, she arranged extra coal in hidden compartments. Overseers assumed she was simply thorough. They never suspected she was preparing the very instrument of the council's demise. Wayne assisted from the shadows, establishing contingencies, securing contacts among the other slaves, ensuring that the chaos would fall precisely where it needed to. Each piece of the plan strengthened the other's observation, timing, logistics, and the deadly heart of the furnace itself. Esperanza's patience had become a weapon. Years of silence, of servitude, of appearing powerless, all converged in this moment. The men who considered themselves gods of the plantation were blind to the fact that the hand guiding them was steady, cold, and precise. Soon, the fire would claim them, and history, for centuries, would hide the truth of how power can be turned against itself by those it sought to destroy. Power is intoxicating. It blinds. It whispers to men that the world bends to their will. Esperanza understood this better than anyone. The Rice Council didn't need to be forced. They needed only to believe they were untouchable. And she gave them exactly that illusion. Every word, every gesture, every glance she offered was calculated. She became the invisible hand guiding their overconfidence. When Edmund Greyfield boasted of his estates, she nodded imperceptibly. When James Rutherford argued about slave breeding, she smiled politely. Every micro-expression, every quiet acknowledgement, reinforced their belief that they were the unquestionable masters of their domain. Esperanza had learned a terrifying truth: the mind of a tyrant is the easiest battlefield. Fear is irrelevant, arrogance is their weakness. And she would exploit it. She watched how they laughed at cruelty, how they rationalized murder, how they divided humanity into property and utility. Their egos were enormous and their attentions narrow. This gave her the margin she needed to orchestrate a perfect strike. She began to plant subtle misdirections. A suggestion of extra coal in the kitchen here, a rearrangement of tools there, each action seemingly mundane, yet each serving to create a controlled environment where chaos could flourish. Chaos that she alone could command. Every council member had a predictable reaction to routine and indulgence, and she mapped it all in her mind. Wayne's network fed her intelligence from across plantations, the movement of guards, the timing of deliveries, the minor conflicts that drew attention elsewhere, all became threads in her intricate web. The furnace, once just a machine, became the heart of an operation that required precision, patience, and total understanding of human psychology. Esperanza understood one critical principle: people are easiest to destroy when they trust their own superiority. And these men, drunk on power, drank deep. Their laughter echoed through the halls. And with every joke about breaking slaves or expanding fields, She stored another fragment of their predictable downfall. By the time the council gathered for their fateful meeting, they were already walking into the trap. Guided by their own hubris, oblivious to the predator in plain sight, Esperanza's patience, observation, and cunning had created a moment where the line between routine and annihilation blurred, and she alone controlled the outcome. She was no longer a servant. She was an executioner, a strategist, a shadow moving behind the guise of subservience. And the furnace, once cold, awaited the first spark of history-altering fire. June 23, 1716. The heat of South Carolina pressed down like a living thing. The sun had barely risen, yet the air inside Greyfield Estate already carried a weight that only Esperanza and Wayne could feel. Today, the machine of cruelty that had enslaved her for 15 years would become her instrument of retribution. She moved through the kitchen with serene precision. Coal was stoked, iron shackles arranged, and every tool meticulously positioned. To any observer, she was performing ordinary duties, sweeping floors, preparing meals, ensuring the estate appeared untouched by malice. But every sweep, every adjustment, every glance at the furnace was a silent drumbeat counting down to the end. She knew the council's habits better than they knew themselves. Marcus Sutton would arrive early, carrying his sense of superiority like armor. Benjamin Fairfax would fidget, overconfident in his bladder breaks. Edmund Greyfield, towering and pale-eyed, would swagger in, laughing at his own sense of invincibility. Every step they took had been anticipated, every flaw exploited. Wayne moved unseen, ensuring that the peripheral chessboard of slaves, doors, and hidden passages was aligned. They had synchronized watches of routine. The guards would patrol, the cooks would serve, the council would believe they were in control, and in their arrogance, they would be blind to the shadow that had been growing for years among them. 3 seconds. Right, fire remembers. Twice in the comments if you feel the pulse of the coming reckoning. Engage, mark yourself in this history of vengeance. Esperanza paused at the furnace, fingers brushing the iron as if testing its resolve. She felt the heat, the potential. 15 years of patience condensed into this single moment. Every insult, every lash, every humiliation she had witnessed. It coalesced into the sharp edge of inevitability. She reflected briefly on the men who had claimed to own her, to own countless others, to wield power like gods. They had never considered that power alone was brittle. They had never realized that years of careful observation, intelligence gathering, and patience could build a weapon far deadlier than any musket or whip. The estate hummed with its usual rhythm, unaware that history was about to rewrite itself. Every step the council would take would lead them closer to the furnace. Every gesture they made would feed their own undoing. And all the while, Esperanza, the shadow no one saw, orchestrated the final act with the calm certainty of a force of nature. The first of them would cross the threshold soon. And once they did, the fire, slow, patient, inevitable, would claim them. The door creaked. Sunlight fell across the polished floor of Greyfield Estate as 14 of the colony's most powerful men stepped inside, oblivious to the storm waiting in plain sight. Each believed their command over life and property was absolute. Each believed themselves untouchable. 3 seconds. Type. Ashes whisper. Twice in the comments to claim your awareness of hidden power. To mark yourself in the echo of history. Esperanza moved among them with the elegance of invisibility. A polite smile here, a refilled glass there, a nod toward some trivial comment, each gesture choreographed to maintain the illusion of her subservience. But inside, her mind was alive, mapping their positions, calculating distances, anticipating reactions. Every arrogance, every predictable weakness was a vector she could exploit. The furnace loomed in the kitchen's center like a dormant god. Its iron ribs glistened, the heat radiating from it almost imperceptibly. But Esperanza felt its pulse. This was the heart of her plan, the instrument of judgment that would turn their power against themselves. 15 years of observation, 15 years of endurance, 15 years of silent rage had led to this single, merciless moment. She guided them subtly. Edmund Greyfield lingered too long by the window, boasting of his empire. Marcus Sutton leaned into the table to inspect ledger entries. Benjamin Fairfax wandered toward the coal supply with predictable distraction. Every misstep, every flaw in their hubris, she had already anticipated. Wame, hidden in the shadows, ensured that no unexpected variables could disrupt her choreography. Other slaves moved as if by routine, unaware of the role they were playing in this lethal theater. The estate itself, with its walls, its floors, its familiar corners, had become an accomplice. Esperanza's heart did not race. Anger did not blind her. This was execution, not chaos. Precision guided every decision. The men were locked into their routines, dancing toward their fate, while laughing at their imagined dominance. They were gods in their own eyes. And yet, like all false gods, they were vulnerable to the hands of those they thought beneath them. She paused near the furnace, fingers brushing its iron frame, feeling the readiness of fire and coal, the inevitability of consequence. History would remember this night not for the cruelty of the men, but for the wrath of the woman who had learned to survive it all. The stage was set. The players, arrogant and blind, were in position. The shadow of vengeance stretched across the kitchen, silent but absolute. Soon, the fire would speak. Esperanza's hands hovered over the coal, steady and deliberate. Each piece she placed, each motion she made, seemed mundane to the eyes of the council, but in truth, she was awakening a beast that had been slumbering in iron and flame. The furnace, massive and unyielding, responded to her touch. Slowly, carefully, she increased the heat, letting it build, unseen, imperceptible, yet inevitable. The council continued their banter, oblivious. Edmund Greyfield laughed, pointing out flaws in Marcus Sutton's rice calculations. Benjamin Fairfax fretted over his investments, unaware of the slow, creeping danger inches from his feet. They trusted routine, the predictability of the estate, the silence of their servants. They trusted themselves. The air in the kitchen thickened. Sweat beaded on foreheads, a mundane discomfort that masked the true peril. Esperanza moved among them, polishing silverware, refilling glasses, nodding at jokes. A shadow of obedience. And all the while, the furnace climbed in temperature, each subtle increase calculated to maximize heat without arousing suspicion. Wame, stationed in a hidden corner, observed with quiet intensity. Any sudden change in the council's demeanor could signal premature panic, but for now they were perfect. Arrogant, unthinking, and exactly where Esperanza needed them. She recalled every lesson from her youth, every strategy learned in the Portuguese villages, every manipulation of human psychology she had studied in secret. Fear, she knew, could be engineered. The furnace would not kill quickly. It was not yet time for chaos. It would rise slowly, a creeping dread that would compound with each passing moment, forcing them to confront their mortality inch by inch. Each council member unknowingly positioned themselves like pieces on a chessboard. Edmund Greyfield by the hearth, boasting. Marcus Sutton leaning too close to the coals. Benjamin Fairfax distracted near the storage of firewood. Esperanza's mind recorded every movement, every reaction, every subtle shift of weight. The heat, initially gentle, began to whisper along their skin. It was imperceptible at first, a mere nudge at the senses, a warning buried in comfort. And yet, those who were attuned would have felt it. A signal that control was slipping, that the world they believed absolute was beginning to turn against them. Esperanza paused, satisfied. The ignition had begun. History was now in motion. The men who thought themselves untouchable had begun to feel the first taste of consequence, and in that subtle, invisible warning, they were already losing. The room seemed unchanged. Candles flickered, silver gleamed, and the council continued their endless chatter. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle, insidious force was moving. Esperanza's furnace was no longer merely a tool. It was a predator, patient and precise, sensing vulnerability and adapting. The first signs of discomfort appeared almost imperceptibly. Edmund Greyfield shifted in his seat, dabbing his forehead as sweat began to bead. Marcus Sutton frowned, squinting at the ledger, trying to focus while a growing warmth pressed at his back. Benjamin Fairfax adjusted his coat, murmuring irritably about the unseasonable heat. Each man believed it to be ordinary. The summer sun, the oppressive colonial air. They did not see the orchestrated power closing in around them. Esperanza moved through them like a ghost. Every smile, every nod, every refilled glass reinforced their confidence, their arrogance. She allowed herself small, controlled glances at their reactions, noting which men noticed the heat first, which tried to rationalize it, and which dismissed it altogether. Their minds were bending, stretching, and subtly unraveling, yet none recognized the hand that guided the process. The coal beneath the iron furnace hissed, its temperature rising with precise calculation. Esperanza had spent months studying its behavior, its strengths, its thresholds. She had learned how to manipulate its airflow, how to stoke the fire just enough to awaken slow, psychological panic before physical agony. Each degree, each ember, each flicker of heat was deliberate, a whisper of inevitability only she understood. 3 seconds. Type, heat reveals truth. Twice in the comments to acknowledge your awareness of patience as power, and the subtle force that controls outcomes. The men's movements became increasingly erratic, though they did not yet connect their unease to reality. Conversations faltered. Laughter stuttered. Edges of fear appeared where arrogance had once thrived. Their egos, normally shields against perception, now worked against them. Their confidence was a blindfold, and Esperanza guided them step by step toward the edge. Wayne watched from the shadows, confirming her control, noting the perfection of their positioning. The trap had shifted from theory to execution. The psychological manipulation, years in the making, was now fully operational. Esperanza's calm contrasted with the imperceptible tremors of the council. She knew that fear, when carefully nurtured, could shape the mind as completely as chains ever had. And tonight, it would guide them to their doom, not with chaos, but with certainty. The first true sparks of panic were about to ignite. The oppressive heat shifted from subtle to undeniable. Edmund Greyfield's shirt clung to his skin. Marcus Sutton wiped sweat from his brow with growing irritation. Benjamin Fairfax muttered complaints, scanning the room as if the oppressive warmth were some trick of architecture. Their arrogance, once impenetrable, began to crack under the slow, creeping weight of reality. Esperanza glided among them, calm, methodical, invisible. To the untrained eye, she was performing the routine duties of a servant, clearing plates, pouring wine, adjusting utensils. To anyone attuned to the orchestration of vengeance, she was a master of control, bending the minds of men who thought themselves untouchable. Every small gesture reinforced their belief that nothing was amiss. They could not yet see the true source of the threat, only feel the unease it bred in their bones. She allowed their discomfort to grow just enough to plant seeds of panic without alerting them to the inevitable. Their predictable patterns guided her strategy. Edmund Greyfield, tall and overconfident, fanned himself ineffectively, trying to assert control. Marcus Sutton shifted closer to the ledger, his mind desperately searching for an explanation, but failing to find one. Benjamin Fairfax's face reddened, a flush of helplessness creeping into his normally confident demeanor. The furnace pulsed like a living entity. Esperanza's hands adjusted coals, managing airflow with meticulous precision. Each ember fed the slow burn, each rise in temperature calculated to maximize psychological torment. She did not hurry. She had spent 15 years cultivating patience. The furnace was her instrument, and she knew exactly when to let it sing its deadly song. 3 seconds. Type, fire knows all. Twice in the comments to recognize the power of deliberate action and the inevitability of consequences. Wayne observed silently from the shadows, ensuring no external interference would disrupt the orchestration. The room's subtle shift in temperature had become a tangible force, pressing against the men, whispering warnings they could not decipher. Sweat dripped from temples, palms grew clammy, and subtle tremors of fear threaded through the council. Esperanza watched, noting each small crack in their composure. This was not chaos, it was methodical unraveling. The arrogance that had made them untouchable now betrayed them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Each second of heat, each whisper of inevitability, pulled them closer to the point of no return, and in the calm eye of this storm, Esperanza remained untouchable. The architect of fear, the shadow behind their doom, the woman who had learned to survive and now commanded absolute power. The furnace was ready. Their undoing was imminent. The heat surged, no longer a gentle warning but an undeniable presence pressing against their skin. Edmund Greyfield's voice cracked as he barked at Marcus Sutton to check the windows. Marcus fumbled with his papers, sweat slicking his hands, eyes darting toward the corners of the room. Benjamin Fairfax clutched at his chest, muttering prayers that had no effect. The arrogance that had sustained them was collapsing under the weight of the slow, deliberate inferno. Esperanza moved with serene purpose. Each gesture appeared mundane, brushing a table, rearranging plates. But each motion subtly guided the council into positions of vulnerability. Their own hubris, once armor, now functioned as chains, locking them into the exact spots she had calculated years in advance. The furnace roared quietly, a coiled predator waiting for the moment to strike. She observed their behavior with clinical precision. The men's panic grew, though none yet understood its source. Edmund's skin flushed crimson, the veins along his temple pulsing visibly. Marcus's knees trembled, almost imperceptibly, but enough for her to note. Benjamin's breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. Fear was not chaos here, it was engineered, sculpted over years of patient observation, and it was working flawlessly. 3 seconds. Type. Shadows rise. Twice in the comments to align yourself with awareness and the power that moves unseen. Esperanza allowed the furnace to grow hotter, feeding on the precise moments when the council's confidence faltered. A flicker of sweat along Greyfield's jaw, a stammer in Sutton's voice, a hand shaking involuntarily as Fairfax tried to grasp his glass. All signals that the trap was no longer theoretical. The furnace's heat was now a weapon, subtle yet relentless, bending their minds while scorching their flesh. Wayne ensured that no servant, no distraction, could alter the delicate choreography. Every detail had been accounted for: their positions, the furnace's temperature, the psychological torment building in layers. This was no mere execution. It was a symphony of precision, a testament to Esperanza's mastery of patience, observation, and vengeance. The first audible whimper from Edmund startled no one but her. He was the first to recognize, however vaguely, that something beyond natural circumstance was happening. Panic began to ripple through the council, though they still clung to their authority, still searched for rational explanation. The moment of terror was mounting, inevitable and irreversible. Esperanza remained calm. She had seen centuries of cruelty in their eyes and endured every form of degradation. Tonight, she would return it multiplied, controlled, absolute. The fire was no longer just heat, it was inevitability given flesh. The collapse of their arrogance had begun. The room shimmered with oppressive heat. Edmund Greyfield's breathing became ragged, his face slick with sweat, hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. Marcus Sutton's eyes darted around, seeking escape routes that did not exist. Benjamin Fairfax muttered broken prayers, unable to mask the creeping horror that slithered into every corner of his mind. The furnace's blaze, subtle yet inexorable, had become a silent executioner. Esperanza moved through the room with calculated serenity. Each adjustment of a chair, each pour of wine, each brush of her fingers across a polished surface was a nudge in the right direction. She did not hurry. She had spent 15 years cultivating patience, mastering observation, understanding fear. Now it guided her like a conductor, every motion orchestrated to perfection. The furnace pulsed, a living entity responding to her touch. Coals shifted, airflow adjusted, temperature climbed in measured increments. The heat crept along the men's bodies, forcing beads of sweat, stifled coughs, and panicked glances. Their minds, trained in arrogance, began to betray them. They were gods no longer, they were prey. 3 seconds. Type. Cole remembers. Twice in the comments to mark your presence in history, and to recognize the hidden forces that shape outcomes. Each man reacted differently. Greyfield tried to assert control, commanding Sutton to check the ventilation. Sutton's voice faltered, words stuck in his throat. Fairfax's hands shook uncontrollably as he wiped his brow, realization dawning that no authority, no wealth, no lineage could save him. Panic had become tangible, a creeping weight pressing from the floor to the ceiling, saturating the air with dread. Esperanza noted every nuanced micro-expressions, involuntary twitches, subtle shifts in posture. She was learning, adapting, exploiting. Wayne, concealed in shadow, monitored the scene, ensuring no interruption could derail the symphony of terror. Every element of the estate was a part of the plan: walls, floors, the ceiling, even the furnace itself. They were surrounded by inevitability. The heat was no longer just uncomfortable. It was a weapon. The first real pain pressed against their skin, and with it came the first true understanding they were no longer in control. Fear metastasized, infecting their minds, unraveling their arrogance. And yet, in their panic, they still could not see Esperanza. could not perceive the force orchestrating their suffering. She paused briefly, savoring the precision of it all. Every second, every degree of temperature, every subtle adjustment of their positions was calculated. The men who had controlled lives with impunity were now puppets in the hands of one woman who had learned to endure, to observe, and ultimately, to command the inevitability of retribution. The moment of no return had arrived. The flames of inevitability were rising. Sweat poured from their bodies, but it did nothing to cool the crushing heat that pressed in from every direction. Edmund Greyfield's hands shook as he attempted to fan himself, only to find the movement futile. Marcus Sutton clutched the edge of the table, eyes wide with terror, muttering incomprehensible pleas. Benjamin Fairfax sank to his knees, chest heaving, the room spinning around him. Their arrogance, their belief in invincibility, had evaporated into a haze of fear. Esperanza observed silently, every inch of her body poised, every thought focused. She was both calm and terrifyingly precise, a predator in human form. The furnace roared softly, feeding on their panic, each degree of temperature carefully calibrated to break not just flesh, but spirit. The fire was no longer a tool. It had become a judge, a jury, and a sentence all in one. 3 seconds. Type, ash to ash, twice in the comments to acknowledge your witness to inevitability and to claim awareness of forces beyond perception. The men writhed in their seats, realizing with horrifying clarity that this was no accident, no lapse in maintenance. They had been trapped, ensnared by a mind far superior in patience, strategy, and understanding of human psychology. Greyfield, once towering in arrogance, now trembled, sweat streaming down his face as he glanced toward the furnace, comprehension dawning too late. Sutton's calculations, once so precise, had failed him entirely. Fairfax's prayers fell flat, swallowed by the oppressive heat and the suffocating inevitability orchestrated by Esperanza. Wame's presence remained unseen, a silent sentinel ensuring that no disruption could save the doomed men. Every movement, every flicker of light, every subtle shift in their behavior had been predicted. Esperanza's orchestration was flawless, a testament to 15 years of observation, patience, and accumulated knowledge. The furnace now reached a peak, the heat radiating through the floor, walls, and air. The council's panic had become physical agony. Their bodies betrayed them as completely as their minds had. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the room offered no escape. Their doom, meticulously planned and patiently executed, was now inescapable. Esperanza took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the culmination of her plan. The men who had inflicted so much suffering, who had seen human lives as nothing more than property, were finally powerless. The moment of irreversible consequence had arrived. Every second, every degree, every bead of sweat was a testament to inevitability, to justice engineered with precision. The furnace demanded its due, and Esperanza's hand guided every measure. The final act was about to begin. The heat became unbearable. Sweat streamed in rivers down faces, soaking clothing, drenching hands that fumbled helplessly at the edges of tables. Edmund Greyfield's breaths came in shallow, desperate gasps, each inhale a struggle against the rising inferno. Marcus Sutton clutched his head, moaning incoherently, as the world around him warped into flickering shadows. Benjamin Fairfax's knees buckled beneath him, skin reddened, lips cracked, as he shrieked prayers to a god who seemed deaf. The power they had wielded for decades, the ability to command, to punish, to dominate, was meaningless now. Esperanza watched with the calm precision of a master, moving like a shadow among the crumbling men. Every gesture, every minute adjustment of coals and airflow intensified their suffering. The furnace was no longer a tool. It was an extension of her will, a relentless manifestation of years of planning, patience, and observation. She had learned their routines, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, every detail exploited with surgical accuracy. 3 seconds. Type, flame reveals all. Twice in the comments to seal your understanding of cause, consequence, and the hidden forces shaping history. Greyfield's vision blurred. His arrogance had collapsed under a new, undeniable truth. He was powerless. Sutton's mind scrambled for solutions, any means of escape, but the heat and panic had stripped him of reason. Fairfax's voice had grown hoarse from screaming, his mind shredded by the slow, inescapable precision of torment. Each man was trapped in his own body, a prison of fear and agony orchestrated with cold genius. Wayne observed from the shadows, ensuring the execution unfolded exactly as designed. Every flicker of flame, every sigh, every panicked glance had been anticipated. The men read, unaware that their fates were not dictated by chance, but by the patient, methodical mind of one woman who had endured 15 years of cruelty and broken silence. Esperanza's face remained impassive, her eyes scanning every detail, every twitch, every moment of recognition. The furnace's heat had become a psychological instrument as much as a physical one, bending minds as it scorched bodies. Their screams echoed, not just in the room, but in the corridors of history, a testimony to the inevitability she had wrought. And then, with terrifying inevitability, the culmination arrived. The final screams, the last shuddering breaths, the absolute collapse of arrogance and cruelty, all carefully measured, all entirely irreversible. Esperanza had not merely survived, she had executed justice with precision, leaving a mark on history that would linger long after the flames cooled. The men were gone. The message was delivered. The power balance, once unquestioned, had been shattered forever. The furnace's roar faded into an ominous silence. Smoke curled along the rafters, carrying with it the echoes of agony that would never be forgotten. The Greyfield estate was still, except for the quiet hum of Esperanza moving among the remnants, ensuring nothing disrupted the final impression of her meticulous work. Every trace had been accounted for, every detail perfected. She did not rush. There was no need. The story had already been written in fire and fear. She paused, eyes scanning the aftermath. 14 men, once arrogant masters of wealth, politics, and cruelty, now reduced to ash and memory. Their names, their titles, their influence. Nothing could withstand the weight of deliberate justice, executed with patience and precision. Esperanza knew that history would bury this event, seal it behind official documents, and sanitize the narrative for generations. Yet the truth lingered, invisible but indelible, a testament to one woman's capacity to endure, observe, and command the course of inevitability. Wayne emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable but eyes reflecting awe and fear. Together, they surveyed what had been wrought. Not merely revenge, but a psychological lesson that would echo in the hidden corners of every plantation, every council, every man who believed in absolute control. Esperanza's plan had been more than fire. It had been a demonstration of awareness, intelligence, and patience as weapons. She whispered to Wayne in their secret language, a phrase that carried the weight of centuries of oppression and the promise of liberation. Power is never absolute. Fear can be turned, controlled, mastered. He nodded, understanding that this was a knowledge few would ever possess and fewer still would survive to wield. The estate remained eerily calm, a ghost of its former brutality. Every corner retained the echoes of horror, yet the living would not know the depth of what had occurred. They would sense, perhaps, the absence of tyranny, the subtle shift in the air, but they could never comprehend the full scope of what had been orchestrated. Esperanza had created a secret history, hidden in plain sight, a narrative that would awaken only those patient enough to observe, daring enough to understand, and bold enough to act. And as the night cloaked over the South Carolina lowlands, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the ashes of those who believed themselves untouchable. Esperanza de Lima became a legend whispered in fear and awe, a symbol of intelligence, patience, and the terrifying power of controlled retribution. The story does not end here. It lives in the subtle manipulations of power, in the lessons we ignore, in the quiet understanding that even the strongest can be undone if someone knows how to watch, wait, and strike.